government meddling in our time. And really, I'm going to take these couple moments here at the beginning it's the fault of the railroads, creating time zones. Some people say that we should either make daylight savings permanent or get rid of it entirely, and I say that doesn't go far enough. We need to bring back local noon, where every town just set noon whenever the sun was right above it, and you'd be 5 minutes off from whoever was a little to the east or the west. This is the way we should go. So if anybody wants to tilt at this windmill with me, we can talk after class. It'll never happen, but it's one of those fun eccentricities you can throw at people when they think that, advocating for the end of daylight savings is not quite eccentric enough. So, local noon. We are in Ecclesiastes chapter 10. So we're not quite at the end of the book, but we can see the end from here probably. Just one more page turn for me and then see the end of Ecclesiastes. So we'll see how much of this we can get through. The format has changed slightly. And we talked about it last week. We'll talk about it some more this week. But before we get started, before we discuss this, before we read any of this, we'll stop for a minute. We'll have a word of prayer, and then we'll go ahead and read and talk about it. So if you'd pray with me, please. Father in heaven, we thank you for this day. We are thankful for this world you have made. God, we are grateful for this time and this opportunity that we have, that we can look into your word, and we ask that you would help us as we do so to understand it better than we have before, to be able to better apply the wisdom that it contains to our lives, and Father, ultimately that what we can learn from it will allow us to give you greater glory and greater honor with our lives. We are thankful for having been made. We are thankful for this time and opportunity, as I say, and Father, we are most thankful that you sent your son Jesus as an example and a teacher and a sacrifice in our behalf to redeem us. And we pray these things in Jesus' name. All right. So as I say, Ecclesiastes 10, and we'll start in verse 1. So as we talked about a little bit last time, these are a little bit more like Proverbs here, moving on. These verses have that aphoristic quality, the idea of trying to sum up, or maybe sum up is the wrong word, to condense an idea or a nugget of wisdom into a short sentence or two in order to convey that. And of course, like a lot of Proverbs, they are not absolutely universal. Right? One of my favorites is to say to someone that, well, all generalizations are false. Which most people have a delightful time when they hear that the first time, realizing that of course is itself a generalization. And so it falls into that kind of liar's paradox where if all generalizations are false, then that one is too. And so Proverbs, though, take of that kind of quality, that they speak about a general truth, which may not be applicable to absolutely 100%, of all situations. So we're going to start in verse 1. I think I'm going to read 10 verses here, because again, they're a little bit short, and a lot of these ideas kind of follow along from one another. So starting in Ecclesiastes 10, verse 1. A dead fly causes the perfumer's oil to send forth an odor. A little folly outweighs wisdom and honor. A wise man's heart is at his right hand, but a fool's heart at his left. Yea, also, when the fool walks by the way, his heart fails him, and he says to everyone that he is a fool. If the spirit of the ruler rises up against you, leave not your place, for gentleness allays great offenses. There is an evil that I have seen under the sun, as it were an error that proceeds from the ruler. Folly is set in great heights, and the rich sit in a low place. I have seen servants upon horses, and princes walking like servants upon the earth. He who digs a pit shall fall into it, and whoever breaks through a wall, a serpent shall bite him. He who hews out stones shall be hurt by them. He who cleaves wood is endangered by it. If the iron is blunt and one does not whet the edge, then must he apply more strength. But the advantage of wisdom is skill. So, we start with, again, these kinds of Proverbs where you have a statement and you have a follow-up, right? An idea and a consequence. to try and provide a small lesson. So the first one starts here. Dead flies give perfume and bad smell. A little folly outweighs wisdom and honor. What is he trying to say with this particular verse, this proverb, if you will? What is the meaning of it? Yeah.
Kind of like one bad apple thrown to the whole box,
Yeah.
one bad guy in the group.
Yeah, exactly. We have various forms of this that have arisen in other languages and cultures, right? One bad apple spoils the bunch. The idea that one thing that is off, one mistake, one problem, one bad actor can cause problems for a large group that is not otherwise, implicated or part of what is going on. Is this true?
Certainly is in a lot of situations.
Yeah.
You can have a good aura going at whatever event or whatever the congregation or any get together socially that's going the right way, and it only takes one guy to get the vibes going the wrong way.
Yeah, this is a kind of a cousin to the proverb, right? That the nail that sticks up gets hammered down, right? What do we notice? We notice the thing that is different from the rest of the group, right? What is it that stands out? It is the person that is different. And there's the positive element to this as well, right? There's a positive version of this proverb that Jesus specifically uses in the New Testament. About a light shining in the darkness, right? That if you are the light in the dark world, then you become obvious and you give out great light based, even though you can be very small and very alone, one light in the darkness is very, very noticeable as well. So it works in both a positive and a negative way, converse and inverse. Yeah. So this is, in this case, speaking of wisdom and honor, and this follows on the last two verses that we had in 9, right? Verse 18, wisdom is better than weapons of war, but one sinner destroys much good. He's following these ideas up, that idea up with this one as well. As dead flies give perfume and bad smell, a little folly outweighs wisdom and honor. He's restating almost the sense of the proverb again, in a slightly different way, with a different metaphor, in order to drive the point home, right? Because this repetition of the idea provides an aid to people remembering, number one. Right? If I say the same thing several times over, sinks in better. I mean, not for everyone. Sometimes my children don't seem to get into it anything times I say it. But generally speaking, if you say the thing over, people retain it. But then as well, by giving it a slightly different spin, right? By using a different metaphor, he allows you to look at the same idea from another angle and to better understand the concept of what it is that he's trying to convey. Right? One sinner destroys much good. Right? You can have one person who does bad things that causes problems for the rest of the group, and he says, well, let's think about this another way. Right? When you have a dead fly and some perfume, what is it that you notice? The dead fly. That's what you're thinking about, the thing that doesn't belong there, the thing that spoils what you've got. So he's giving you another way to look at these things. So then I like to come across these kinds of verses here. Verse 2 and 3. The heart of the wise inclines to the right, the heart of the fool over to the left. And then in 3, even as he walks along the road, the fool lacks sense and shows everyone how stupid he is. What is he trying to say about the wise going to the right and the fool going to the left?
Well, I don't think he's talking about conservatism or liberalism.
I don't think it's politics, no.
But
Possibly handedness. You got to watch out for people that are left-handed.
he's just saying that there's total opposites here.
I'm sorry?
Total opposites.
These are opposites, yeah. The idea of left and right, and this is tough on lefties. I mean, they're fantastic as relief pitchers, and they have lots of wonderful qualities. Very artistic, generally speaking. My wife is left-handed, and I like to give her a hard time about being left-handed sometimes. The association of right and left is very common throughout all kinds of, again, cultures and throughout history. We have a word in English, right, for someone who does foolish things, who says the wrong thing at the wrong moment, commits social faux pas. We say that's very gauche. Does anybody take French? We know what gauche means in French?
Left.
Literally means left. And we have a word in English for somebody who's particularly skillful, right? They're really good at something, right? They're very talented. They're adroit. This comes from French as well, adroit, meaning literally right. We use words in English to mean these things in a metaphorical sense that we literally took from French. And the French use them that way idiomatically as well as literally, meaning left and right. The word sinister. Anybody know what sinister means, right? It's the creepy guy with the mustache and the cape tying legs to railroad tracks in the old silent films. He's a sinister man. He twirls the mustache. He's the villain. Sinister comes from the literal Latin word for left. So, yeah, Dennis.
Well, in Matthew 25, Jesus used the goats on the left and the sheep on the right, so
Yep.
that's carried all the way through in history.
Yeah, it was both in Hebrew culture, it is one that was true in Roman culture, it is one that is true in our culture today. This association of left and right, of good and bad, is just a theme that, again, can have consequences, or you know, my father was left-handed as well, and when he was in school, they tried to train that out of him, right? So now he does some things, and you know, as an adult, right-handed and some left-handed, depending on what his school teachers were able to, I think, hopefully figuratively, beat out of him when he was a child. And it's that association taking this too far. It's not necessarily meaning literally left and right. It is an idiomatic understanding of, okay, good and bad, right? One person does the thing that is good, the other person does the thing that is bad. And the heart of the wise inclines to the right, the heart of the fool to the left, simply meaning, again, not so much that always going down the right-hand fork in the road is the better path, that you can't ever do something with your left hand, but rather that one who is wise has more of an inclination to do the things that are good and proper and right, in the moral sense, not the directional sense. And someone who is foolish is going to incline to those other things that are not. The inverse, things that are improper, things that are evil, things that are bad. So he's making the point about the wise and the foolish. So he says that in verse 2 that these are their inclinations. And then in verse 3, he follows this up and says that even when the fool is traveling down the road, his lack of sense is obvious. What does that mean?
High five.
All right, yeah, that's fair. Yeah, high five, and particularly when you're driving through Tacoma or wherever they're doing construction. Yeah. But perhaps in a more universal sense for anyone that is not a native of this area and spends time driving up and down I-5. More general understanding of what is he talking about when the fool does this? Yeah.
I think even if he's able to direct himself into what's considered to be a proper endeavor, or proper event, or proper whatever, he still winds up being a fool, because if that's his inner makeup, he even in those settings he demonstrates that, comes out, manifests himself.
Yeah, that as he walks along the way, as he travels down the road, his foolishness is obvious. This means that even in the most mundane activities and choices, the fool's lack of sense and thought is obvious. Right? And the idea of being I-5 is very apt. Because how hard is it really to make sure you're in the proper lane when your exit comes up? Not that hard most of the time. Especially if you know where you're going and you've been there before. But we've all seen it. The guy diving across 3 lanes of traffic to try and get to an exit that he really should have just gone by and turned around and come. But even in the most mundane activities, people who are foolish will show you their foolishness. They don't think ahead. They don't make the right plans. They don't do what they ought to do. They just don't have that care. In the same way, you'd have that inverse, right? That the wise person, the person who is trying to practice wisdom, who God has granted wisdom to whom God has granted wisdom, makes that apparent even in the smaller choices that they have. It's not always just the big things in life where these things get exemplified. The momentous decisions about work and family and these sorts of things, but in the small everyday matters. Right? That wisdom can permeate your life in the same way that foolishness, unfortunately, can do the same.
And traveling back then is not like the traveling that we have now. How hard would it be to have traveled down roads that were there if you're walking? Can't be that tough.
Yeah. The idea that you could walk badly is, again, kind of an extreme idea to show or to point to. Foolish people do foolish things constantly and consistently. Wise people make good choices often, frequently. Because, walking is not that hard. Unless you're chewing gum. Walking and chewing gum, all bets are off. I'm just going to keep rolling along here unless anybody wants to flag me down and stop me with some other point they want to make about these verses. So feel free to, wave your hands at me as necessary. Verse 4, if a ruler's anger rises against you, do not leave your post. Calmness can lay great errors to rest. So first thing, before we actually talk about the content of that verse, this one he does not repeat or emphasize following in 5. This doesn't follow in 3 either. This one stands alone. So he has several repetitions and then one that stands by itself, which is an interesting thing to do with this particular verse. What does he mean, though, about calmness and not abandoning your position? Yeah.
Talking back or trying to support yourself and get more into more trouble than
That's certainly true. Yeah.
alone.
Yeah, I read early on somewhere that, you wouldn't think it by the way I'm standing up here just running my mouth, but what is it that, it's better to be silent and have people think you're a fool than to open your mouth and remove all their doubts about you. But yeah, that sometimes just simply being quiet can be the most effective strategy. Yeah.
Now, another take on it is, fall back to some military experience. If put a commanding enlisted man or officer, whatever, has authority over someone, for whatever reason, may decide to test them out. This individual we're talking about that should remain calm. If that person is legitimate in what his positions or whatever it is that he's doing, and remains calm, steadfast, keeps his feet on the ground and keeps his mouth shut, the guy will move on and leave him alone, and the guy can continue on in his position and be just fine. The king will leave him alone. That's another take on it.
Yeah, it's again, there's a related idea that, I don't know if this is still true. I'm not a lawyer, and so this isn't legal advice, but I know that for a long time, in some states in the United States, that if you were to try and get away when you knew there was a warrant for your arrest, that could be used as an admission of guilt if you were ever caught and brought to trial. They didn't necessarily have to go through the process of proving that you had done the thing. Simply by running away, it was considered to have admitted wrongdoing in what you were accused of. And this idea then is related, that that if you are in trouble, or someone is saying that you should be in trouble for something, simply remaining calm exudes that kind of idea of innocence, or that you are unjustly accused, right? That you have confidence in your own position, that you are in fact correct. And that sometimes being steadfast in the face of criticism is one of the most effective ways to deflect or defeat that. Yeah.
I look at this also like, especially if I'm dealing with kids or people that may be immature, where they start going off the handle, they start throwing their temper tantrums. If you stay calm and allow them to work themselves through that situation to where they can calm back down, you'll be able to reason with them. But if you start arguing back with them, it does not spiral the situation completely out of control, and now you're both fools.
That's an excellent point. Yeah. That if you react in the same way that they are, you simply can escalate a situation to make it worse, and cut off any hope for resolving it peacefully again. But if you remain calm, you allow them a chance to talk themselves down from wherever they're at. Yeah. Dennis, what do you do?
Well, even if a ruler challenges you, he can be wrong. And if you know for a fact that you're right, you need to stand your ground. If you watch all the police shows like Blue Bloods or all that, and the detective says, "Hey, you," and they take off running, you know they feel guilty, or that they feel like they know that they're wrong. So there are times, and in the church and in the world, where you have to stand your ground and say, "No, I'm not going to be a part of that." I don't care what the government says or the rulers say, I know this to be true, and I will stand on that.
Right.
Look at all the Christian martyrs that died because they stood for what they knew to be right.
Yeah, there's certainly, again, this gets into the more, the Christian ideal of remaining steadfast in your position even though you will be unjustly punished or persecuted for the truth. But in this particular proverb, he's taking that opposite's not the right word, a slightly different outcome. That calmness can put to rest other people's doubts or bad opinions of you, and that it can correct those errors. It becomes an argument in your favor. Your own confidence in your position becomes evidence for your position, right? That you are willing to hold to it and trust in the fact that you are correct. Yeah.
If you've ever debated, you believe that your side is true, and you will debate it all day long.
Right. Yeah, that confidence can be very persuasive. What's the internet can't? The person who gets angry in the debate on the internet is clearly the one that is wrong, right? Simply by remaining calm, you become the winner in the perception of the world who is looking on. The person who does not have to get angry about things is apparently confident enough in their own position. It remains true thousands of years later. There's a couple verses that go together here. I'm going to read 5, 6, 7. There is an evil I have seen under the sun, the sort of error that arises from a ruler. Fools are put in many high positions, while the rich occupy the low ones. I have seen slaves on horseback, while princes go on foot like slaves. So he first of all starts off by saying that this is a bad thing. He says it is an error that comes from those in power, the rulers. What is wrong with this? Why is this an error?
Generally, I would think, if you have a fool in power trying to regulate folks, they suffer.
Yeah.
Generally, the folks suffer.
Absolutely.
And that's pretty typical what's going on right now in society.
Well, and it's certainly not a new phenomenon, right? The teacher here is writing about it thousands of years ago. It has been a problem. It is a problem now, and I'd be willing to bet it will continue to be a problem far into the future. That people will put fools in positions of power. They will not put most suitable people in most suitable places. And it causes problems, yeah. If you've ever had somebody who didn't really understand how the regulation of your business works, trying to tell you how to do things, whether it's somebody trying to enforce building codes or, more of my experience, right, insurance regulations, trying to give you instruction on what you should and should not do and how things ought to work, they don't understand what's going on, that doesn't help. Not only does it frustrate and anger you, but things don't get done properly. Things don't get done well, and things aren't done efficiently. Putting foolish people in power over other people's lives is all kinds of bad outcomes. Yeah.
We have a lot of prime examples of that in our major corporations in this country. Multinational leadership has demonstrated that numerous times. They work their way up, or they're put in those positions by board members and different things that have motivations that are suspect. And anyway, the leaders will make decisions based on something, perhaps like, an example given, Boeing. They put a guy in there, decided to save a few bucks, cut out a redundant system and crash 2 planes and just about breaks the company. Those kind of leaders are abundant in our major corporations. You see guys rising up to those levels all the time. And then they take influence over a lot of people who are working in an organization that really have a lot on the ball, are subject to those kind of whims. They do things for underlying reasons, perhaps to get a higher bonus, that's based on short-term calculations. In the end, the suffering research and development that would actually, if money was expended there, would take away from its bonus potential. So they make those kind of decisions that really, behind the scenes, are not good at all, and they're made for reasons other than what you would think should be done.
Yeah, certainly a lot of times people put others in positions of power for reasons that are not the right ones, right? Short-term gain, monetary profit over some sort of quality, things like that. I always forget the name of it. Is it the Peter Principle? The idea that people rise to the level of their own incompetence?
Peter Principle.
Yeah, where you promote somebody because you just want to get rid of him, like get him out of my department, let's promote him to somebody else's department, until he rises to a point where doing that would just be absolutely detrimental and you can't let him get promoted anymore. Anyway, but there are other reasons that this sort of thing can occur, right, where you end up with fools in power, is that when you have sometimes a ruler or a leader that doesn't have enough information. I think of like Lincoln during the Civil War. He dealt with, of course, a lot of incompetent generals at the beginning of the war who wouldn't do what he wanted, who wouldn't do what was necessary. And he had a difficult time trying to find people to raise up through the ranks in order to be able to be effective until later on. And part of that was outside of his control. There's people that are available, but how do you know how they will behave when push comes to shove? Will they do the right thing? And sometimes you have to make choices with bad information, and you end up with these unfortunate situations through bad luck.
We have a really great example of something unfolding in front of us right now in our military. Actually, for the last few years, but our leadership or generals and so forth have been being promoted on the basis that has nothing to do with warfighting. They've been being promoted on the basis of some of their social beliefs and some of the other agendas that the political leadership is trying to superimpose on them. And so you've got leaders that are being promoted that aren't being promoted on the basis of their merit or what they know about military and just call it the war fighting purpose, which is the real purpose of them being there in the first place.
Mm-hmm.
And so these other things are overtaking the expertise in that field. And so it's in my opinion, a huge mistake, but it's a really vivid example of how that can take place.
Yeah, no, that's certainly true. I mean, this is the case in the U.S. military. It is been cyclical, right? It's not like it's ever occurred once and then stopped and fixed that problem, will never happen again, which this is one of the big themes in Ecclesiastes, right? There's nothing new under the sun. Everything that we're talking about is things that have happened before, right? Anything that's happening in this world today, in principle, is things that have already happened. And, delightfully, he said sarcastically, it'll happen again. You can't get away from it. It's just going to repeat and recur, and we're going to have to continue to learn and relearn these same lessons. Wayne, you're going to...
You know, the next two verses, I think, are an outcropping of the problem that we're discussing now. It's not just one-dimensional. It affects a lot of other things, like a domino effect. The slaves on the horses, I thought was interesting.
Yeah, so the 6 and 7, right? The idea of fools in high positions and the rich occupy low ones, right? Or the people that are successful. But then he talks about slaves on horseback and princes on foot. What do these verses mean then for us? Right? So we talked about it from the perspective of someone who's in charge. Why do they put foolish people in positions of power? Why do they raise them up? But what does that mean for us who are not rulers? People who are looking up at the ruler and his choices, as it were. What does that mean for what we should expect about the world that we inhabit and the people that we're going to have to deal with? Or for ourselves specifically?
Well, it's a reasoning that we all complain about the government, we all complain about the traffic, and we all complain about all this stuff. But in the end, we have no control over it. It isn't us guiding it.
Right.
So if you kick God out of it, if we're looking at just worldly, we're no magic man. I mean,
Everybody talks about the weather, but nobody does anything about the weather. Yeah. That we can't expect to always be rewarded for our virtue. That's one of the points that I think he's making with these verses. You will not always get what you deserve. Sometimes that's a comforting thought, right? You know, praise God for Jesus, I will not get what I deserve for my life at the end of it. But by the same token, in this life, I will deserve a promotion that I will not get. Someone else will get it instead of me for some reason. I will deserve to get that job that I applied for, and I will not get it because somebody's hiring their buddy. And I will deserve to be treated better by my friends or my family because I am trying to be kind and selfless and thoughtful, and somebody's in a bad mood, and they will be rude to me. And this is one of those kind of harsh realities of life that both good and bad people do not always get in this life what they deserve. We will look around and we will see these kinds of injustices, and we will not always know the reason for them, but they are endemic. They're everywhere in society. They're everywhere in all kinds of ways, big and small. And it is a fact of life that we can work on, that we can attempt to correct as best we can, when and where we can, by being just ourselves as much as we can be. But we can't fix this. We'll never make it perfect and we'll never make it right. It will be a struggle constantly. And we'll always be seeing these measures of injustice. We'll look around and we'll see people and we'll think, how did he get that? Why is he the person that gets to be this, or those, or that, or the other? And it's not always going to make sense.
And I think we're in a period of time right now where people are acting out based on their personal opinion of what's right and what's wrong for them. So we get all of these factions that have a belief. that may not hold water for everybody. So we're fighting over, kind of like a 6 or 7 dogs fighting over one bone.
This is true, but it has ever been thus, right? I mean, this is, if you go back to chapter 7, right, 7 verse 10 in Ecclesiastes, right, this is what the author, right, he says, don't say, why were the old days better than these? For it is not wise to ask these questions. The idea that it was better before is not an accurate notion, right? It was different before. Might have been better in some ways, but it was certainly worse in others. And in some ways, things were just like they are now. Every time has these kinds of troubles. And, you know, the other side of that is, of course, the depressing realization that we'll also never fix them. We will not perfect this world. It will have to be destroyed and remade when Jesus comes again. All right, I'm going to see if I can sneak in these last two here, 8 and 9. Whoever digs a pit may fall into it. Whoever breaks through a wall may be bitten by a snake. Whoever quarries stones may be injured by them. Whoever splits logs may be endangered by them. This is a fourfold repetition of an idea here. What is the idea that he is trying to convey?
Even if you're doing something constructive, it can still get you.
Yeah. Yeah. There is nothing without risk. Anybody can be unlucky. Right? Whatever your job is, whatever the task at hand is, it can go wrong. And it doesn't have to be through any fault of your own. Right? We get that in the second half of 8. Whoever breaks through a wall may be bitten by a snake. Something you didn't even know was a danger. Something you didn't even realize was there. And then, boom. Whatever job that you're engaged in, whatever activity you're doing, there's that potential risk and danger in life. It is a mistake to think, one, that we are so skillful that we have eliminated risk, or two, that any activity is completely and perfectly safe, that we're completely and perfectly secure wherever we happen to be. This, if we're speaking about, modern ideas and times, this is one that I think that perhaps we have kind of swung the pendulum on lately a little bit. Right? The idea that we can make everything safe for everyone all the time. Without getting into the more hot button recent political topics revolving around sicknesses and masks, we can look at things like car seats, seat belts, bike helmets. Again, not bad things. I'm not saying don't wear a bike helmet, but I didn't as a kid in the 80s. Near the end and beginning of the 90s, my mom made me start wearing. But I remember growing up and riding in a car that didn't have seat belts in it. It used to be the law. They didn't make you put them in there. We had an old enough car that I rode in sometimes that there was no seatbelt. Some then it was just a lap belt.
Well, and you didn't use them if they were in there.
And a lot of people didn't use them. They make rules about it. Again, not to say that any of these things are a bad idea or that it's wrong to try and be safe about things. But what this focus has started to try and move people into is an idea that you can create a world where there are no problems. Right? That you can eliminate all of the risk and everything will be fine. And that once you realize you haven't, that is unacceptable. The wisdom here that we're getting from the teacher is that everything has some measure of risk to it. We will never get away from it. And while we can try and do what we can, right, we ought to be safe about things, make good choices. Right? We look back and think about the wise man and the fool walking along the road. There are good and bad choices in every activity. Even our good and wise choices will not always save us. There's going to be another verse, right, coming on later. The time and chance happen to us all. We are all subject to these random things. Yeah.
This whole concept of trying to create a utopian condition is just turns out to be foolishness. It doesn't work. In big things and little things, governmentally, regulatory, it hasn't worked, it doesn't work. An example, in a smaller scale, not government-wise, but say the regulatory side, we tried to think of every single thing that working people can get into that might bite them, whether they're working on cutting wood or doing this or whatever. I've been in the construction business for a long time, and we're subject to WISH and OSHA and all kinds of regulations on what you should do. And safety has become such a all-encompassing effort, it seems like, by all the regulators. And so everybody thinks, they've got everybody conditioned to the idea that, well, that's really important. And if you don't subscribe to that idea, if you don't completely involve yourself, commit, stand behind all of these different things that they want to do, that there's something, really bad about not falling in line. The reality is, though, you take a bunch of construction workers and you outline them of 30, 40, 50 different kinds of situations they need to not do. Put the big ones in there with the little ones. In other words, there's a few things that will kill them. There's some things on a job site that will kill a person or really get them hurt. Then there's a whole lot of different infractions that, if you commit them, they're not going to result in any real damage to your limb, life, limb, whatever. What happens, the reality is, in trying to comply with all of this stuff, is they lose focus on the stuff that's really critically important. It gets mixed in with all the mundane other little things. And so the end result is they haven't improved overall serious accident much at all in the last 30 years with all of that. So the wisdom of some of these things in terms of trying to create a so-called utopian condition or better condition and get rid of, flatten out all these potential issues and problems, doesn't work.
Yeah, there's frequently unintended consequences to the things that we choose to do that can be, in fact, contrary to desired outcomes. Yeah. All right. I am about to, Keith, do you have something you want to say?
I just sort of think it's a hard way to live. You're just sort of paranoid about everything. It's a hard way to live. I don't like, I used to go skiing when I was younger. I used to be a ski bum. I never wore a helmet. I fell on my head.
Which, again,
I got up and
is not to say that it's not without risk. I mean, you can look at, there are a couple famous people come to mind immediately that have been injured and killed in that same way, but
there are other reasons for that too. It wasn't just because they weren't wearing a helmet. It's
and
because they were skiing it safely too.
It doesn't perfectly alleviate the risk as well. Yeah. Oh.
Along with us, our entire society has somehow been shifted in their thoughts on some of these issues. Like when I was a kid, or when my kids were kids, you haul them around in a car with no seatbelt or no little chair to put them in or whatever, or go out or ride bikes and so forth with no helmet. That's fine, so what? Now, you put a grandkid in a car without a seat on, you're considered a child abuser.
Sure.
Our whole society is shifted in the way that they look at these things.
Yeah. Again, nothing wrong with doing what you can to prevent injury and risk where you can, but the big error is in thinking that you can get rid of it entirely, because you won't. Everything is a little bit dangerous in some way. All right, I've gone well over. I appreciate your patience and your indulgence in this regard. And we will we'll get some more into chapter 10 next week. Thank you very much.
The bar's out that she fell off.